for climate refugee. Without it, there's really just a bottleneck in there for these people. This is a quote I grabbed from one of the multiple videos I got to watch when preparing this presentation by Washington State Governor Jay Inslee. He said, "We are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it." I really like this, and I think he's just right on. And so we just need to stop that egocentrism. We need to look beyond our own selves. Otherwise, we are just in some sort of an impasse. We don't seem to look beyond ourselves, and without stepping away from that attitude, we are hampered from being able to really do something about climate change. And with that, finally come to here. I did mention in the beginning that I didn't want to put much more from me, since this presentation was too long. I rather wanted you all to express your own opinions, your own conclusions, and also I just put that question: what are you doing about this issue as well? So thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, it's fine. That was perfect. We were 3 minutes late.
5 minutes there. So.
And I also think that the stuff we talked about for the Food City Plan, that really is kind of relating on a local level to what you're talking about on a global level, you know, so it's just interesting.
Are any of you all from local or county governments in Northwest Arkansas?
No.
I wrote all of them and have now been for over a year. We need to get our officials informed. So I'll just throw that out. If you know any members of any city council members or any quorum court members, to ask them what they know about global warming and suggest they come to our monthly meeting here, where you see we have very informative programs.
And I'm also curious, did you come for the climate refugees or for the Food City Plan? All right.
Didn't know about the food refugee, but I would talk for me.
Yeah, which is really interesting because that gives us kind of the big picture
Right.
of what is happening around the globe. Well, if you think about what's happening in Fayetteville, and including what our city is thinking about, and this is not a city plan, and I want you to be aware that nobody is saying this could really happen. What we're going to look at, and I was really kind of hoping that the director of the group that did this could be here today, but he couldn't. But the architecture school has the design center that they do these really interesting kind of scenario thinking projects where they let their students and members of their faculty think about how things could be. And so this plan, you will be able to find it on the city website. If you look for Fayetteville Food City Scenario, you will find it on the city webpage. So you can explore this in detail. And we're not going to go over detail because I am not an expert on this plan. And if he had come, I think you'll see some things that are really interesting that you would like to ask him questions, but we're going to have to track him down another time if we actually decide we want to, because the plan itself has some interesting pieces, and these different pieces that he's got here are kind of the core parts that they were looking at when they asked themselves the question, okay, how would a city go about taking care of itself if all of those normal foods, if we couldn't truck our food from California or Arizona, how would we actually feed ourselves? So when they started looking at this, they found themselves going back to pre-industrial culture, which was not all that long ago, and looking for some things that really, they can pull from the past. One thing I want to, before we get started on this, I want to just tell you that there's a group called Transition Initiatives that this group has looked at a couple times, and we are, this is not transition initiatives, however, this is something that fits within that transitions thinking cycle, because what they're doing is they are saying, what do we do when there's no more oil to power our energy systems? And of course, feeding people is really one of the primary things. The air, the food, the water, the land, I mean, those are the pieces that we have to have. And now this, I'm the director of a peace organization. So, you know, it all, in my mind, it always goes back to how does this relate to peace and war? And the thing is, if we can't feed ourselves, if we can't feed our children, we're not happy. And things are going to get tense. So these are always peace issues. They're always environmental issues, and we have to be prepared to realize the things that are happening in South Africa today could be happening in Arkansas in a few years, and we have to be thinking about that.
So just for clarification,
Yeah.
so this was created by these folks who are, you know, all these different groups within the university, et cetera. But there's nothing that's been presented formally to the city government?
No, there's not. And as we go through it, I think we'll emphasize the parts that make it difficult to do that. And we'll talk about that. Because I think, you know, if this were going to happen, it'd have to take a lot of people saying they wanted it to happen. Public pressure would be what would make it happen. And, you know, this is not saying that this is the only way that this should be happening. There are things presented here to help people think outside the box. And that is really kind of where we are. We drive down College Avenue and it just looks like College Avenue. We don't think about what could be different. We see a new development going up on what we know could be good agricultural land, and we're not really thinking about, okay, it's there, what do you do about it? You know, 100 people live there now, so what do you do about the land that could have been growing food instead? So that's part of what's, you know, what we're really up against, you know. However, there's a lot of interesting things here, and I want to point out that you see this image a number of times. This is Fanta. This is what we look like. I just thought that was an interesting thing. And just a little bit further down here is a very interesting, where is it? Okay. Now, this is our history. And I thought this is so interesting. Now, what they have done is that they took as their example for what a city might choose to do about their food system, and they chose us. So, you know, this is not intended to be something that says Fayetteville has to do this, but this is how would you maximize your food growing resources in order to take care of your population. And see, over there, that was us when we were first born. You can see the black blob in the middle where the university is, and then the nice little grid of what the city looked like when we were first platted. That was our first plat. In, what year was that? 1930s. And then it shows how the growth happened over time. And one of the interesting things he says is that, you know, when I moved here in 2000, and, you know, it was so clear that you couldn't go straight to anywhere from anywhere, that you had to go wandering through the hills. But that was not true of us in the beginning. We had this, we started out with a grid that was nicely into the hills, and everywhere you see like North Avenue going like that, it was because they were making it a grid, so they were not paying attention to the hills. But in the 80s, we lost that, and what he says is, we lost the will to grid in the 80s. So since then, we've kind of developed the growth pattern that we've got now. But which also means maybe we're not quite as trapped in the North Avenue problems. So now, take a look at this, because as we go through the Food City Plan, it really does superimpose some interesting stuff on these maps. And so now, what this is a picture of how we are sprawling right now, which is a really interesting thing. And I cannot find the key that says exactly what these things fit. I couldn't find that in here. So I'm not sure exactly what the green and the red mean, but they are designating a rectangle here that is, and see the little black in the middle, that is the old Fayetteville, that's where we started. And the green right around it is something that they are proposing, and they'll follow through with that as we move along, showing how this plan could be developed within that particular grid. So this is the wider area, and what I think the green means is that these are the places that are the good growing areas right now. And they're also the same areas where the big apartment buildings and whatnot. Well, let's start working through this. So here's that square again. And so they're talking about from 2030, which, you know, by 2030, the situation is going to have gotten a lot more dire around the globe. And the timeline you were talking about, what we're seeing here is really going to be kind of reflected in a lot of different things that were in the presentation. The sprawl that we're working on, that we are currently involved in, really does trap us into a situation where, with that other 100,000 people who are showing up in between now and 2030, and whoever comes after that, we really are going to have to have done something different than we know how to do at this point. Okay, so here we have the geography of the Fayetteville area. So you can see where the mountains are, and see where the river valley flows through there, the White River and the West Fork River, and of course the river plains really are where a lot of the growing area is. And now you can see they're putting this into blocks. They've gridded this out into blocks. And so they're proposing an idea that really does involve a way of looking at this space that is different than we do now. And so what they are really going to be proposing, what is all stuff here? Oh, this is the way the streets lay out. And okay, this is stuff he could tell us a lot about, but I'm not going to be able to give you much detail. Okay, so what they're really proposing, and they introduced this idea right here, that this could be a situation where different parts of the city are dedicated to certain purposes. And now we're coming into the first place where we see what the political difficulties of doing this would be. Because, see, they're proposing that there be grazing areas all along this end of town, aquaculture facilities here, that there be a waste-to-energy district established in a couple of different areas of town where they're, taking whatever waste, using it to incinerate and turning it into energy that's used by the community. And then there's other places where they do, they call it grow streets, where the whole neighborhood, the yards are gardens. So people are feeding themselves. They're taking their extras to the farmer's market, they're donating their food to their neighbors, and it's dedicated to food rather than lawns. Then there's also urban farms that they've got designated in here. And I forgot what they call it, but a place where they're set up to process the food. So somebody might take their excess okra and process masses of okra, which then they can sell or distribute in whatever way they want. But there's a place that it can be done easily, safely, with whatever regulation the city felt like they had to do. The community could have a facility to do that. They have greenhouses on the top of the old mall plan. They have indoor farmers markets that can run year-round. And these are all plotted into the way the city's laid out, which may or may not be okay with people who currently are owning the land. Mm-hmm. So first thing is, the community's going to have to agree that this would benefit the community enough that we decide that we want to do something like this. And we can't say that at this point, you know, I mean, nobody is gonna donate their property unless they're willing to do that. So then, this is very interesting, we're not gonna try to go over it. 21 different real estate products that can kind of come out of this, so they will detail some of those things that are, you know, the pieces that they feel like would be necessary for the community to be able to take care of ourselves really well, but not really depend on an outside system to bring it in. What do you want? That's a lot to look through, so we're not going to talk about that. Okay, so now here is that plan in a little bit more detail, because you can see where the composting district, this is a very important part of growing all these great gardens and improving the soil, because some of us have good soil, some of us don't have a lot of rich soil. The composting is going to be a really important part of that. Aquaculture, and you know, when we are not depending on beef, cattle, and where the aquaculture becomes a different kind of importance to us, and also the way that chickens are raised that help aquaponics and water-grown vegetables and that kind of thing. All of that stuff is really important in how this actually functions together. One real important part that I think is interesting thought I had when you were talking about the levels of rice going. You know, our diet's wheat-based. And one of the things that the transition group has pointed out is that almost every community can feed itself, meet its own needs for vegetables. Very few of us can actually feed ourselves on our wheat or rice needs. Most of that stuff grows well in a certain place and has to be brought in. So how would we get our basic crops, the core pieces of our diet, how are we going to take care of it on that? And that's why those big areas around the town, it's so important that those get saved in some fashion. And looking ahead to the point where we really need to have space where that wheat can grow. And the waste to energy districts, you know, those are really important to thinking, how do we actually meet our energy needs? And, you know, there's also, we just had a meeting with the city sustainability director in our Quaker meeting a little while ago, and he was telling us that the city's plan, which I have some copies of this here, there may be enough of those, see if there's enough for everybody to have one of those. That's the city's sustainability plan for this year. And the energy needs that he talked about, they're hoping that they can have 80% of our energy needs met by 2030 and 100% of our energy needs met by 2050. Is that right?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. And so they are thinking in terms of some of this waste to energy, and that's not high on their priority list.
This is just for electricity.
Well, he said energy, he did not say electricity, because it does not include transportation. So that, which is always a big.
Oh, it's 100% clean energy for the city by 2030 and for the community by 2030.
That's what it was, yeah. So the city is thinking about this, and the sustainability department has thinking in place that could be really helpful. However, they're not ready to go this far yet to be thinking about the kind of sustainability issues we're really struggling to even think about yet.
Well, that's where they're already doing the composting, right? Where the city is planning for their route.
I was curious about that. Is that the plant on the, what is it, southeast side of town?
And I don't think that's, I don't think that is, but I can't really say. That, well, composting district, yeah, could be.
It's down where the recycling station is.
Down where the
It's right.
station is, yeah.
It's I have a trailer load of that in my driveway right now.
So, and those of us who are in the Fayetteville,
Oh, okay.
Fayetteville.
Welcome. And your daughter's introduced you as Nancy.
And I didn't get your name.
Oh, Scott.
Scott.
He's not.
Scott's been here, he's not in here.
I better look.
Yeah. Go ahead, Nancy, what were you gonna say?
So what are you talking about here about the composting?
So the city now does a compost, he told us they have a 2-acre composting lot where they are bringing in yard waste and composting it, and they actually sell it or donate it to residents of the city. So they're doing that already. What they are up against is that there's a lot of, we have a limited landfill right now that is getting pretty close to full. And so at this point, they're trying to figure out how do we not put so much into the landfill, and one of the biggies, they just finished a study last year, and one of the biggies that they're seeing that we have in our landfill is food waste from major industrial, the big restaurants, the university, the processing plants, a lot of food waste. So that's one of the things that they are working on plans for how to collect that and utilize that in the composting facility, but they don't have that plan in place yet. Another biggie is that they don't know what to do with is construction waste. A lot of construction going on here, and they haven't figured out how to, and they could compost a lot of that stuff, but the collecting is a hard thing, so they're not really ready for that yet.
You're starting with the culture of composting or recycling.
Yeah.
Our citizens do not necessarily, I think we all do here to some degree, but outside of this small group, I don't see a lot of recycling.
What he said was a little bit hopeful to me, because he said that 41% of households, we don't have a good plan in place to take recycling from the apartment complexes, which is so many apartment complexes, and we don't have a good plan for working with those yet. But of the single households, 41% of people do not recycle. But that means, that over 60%, nearly 60% do recycling that though, it could be better.
Do you know how they count that, doing the recycles?
Well, I know the study that they did was where they select and it was a pretty intensive study where they were going into people's neighborhoods and counting their trash.
Okay, the reason I ask that is because I compost my own food waste. I doubt if anybody knows that.
Yeah.
I do it, but the squirrels get most of it.
Yeah.
Not deer.
Feed the squirrels and raccoons.
That's very good of you. They love you, I'm sure. Let's see, what else we got here? Okay, so they go into details about the composting district, and there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. This is part of the composting district. I just thought it was interesting, they called this the Pollutant Remediation Guild. And the image that came into my mind with that was that this neighborhood gets together and they focus on what they do. I thought, oh, that's cool. But who knows if anybody want to do that, Do I really want to be in the composting neighborhood or not? And I don't know, but, so, when they're thinking about this as outside the box, they're not thinking of the old rugged individualist Arkansas culture that we grew up with, and those of us who've been here a while, What they're thinking is, what would an ideal community do? And I think, in some ways, our ability to survive and thrive is going to depend on whether we can move from wherever we're thinking to something that's a whole lot better than we are right now. And this is one tool. So, thinking of it as a tool for discussion and ways to contemplate options, I think that's really where he's going with this. And here, this is the groceries. And I thought this is just really a cool image. So you can see here the overview of it and the street view of it. And a lovely neighborhood. Yeah. And then edible parks. And you can see here, get a street view of that one. And then here you can kind of see an overview Okay, this is probably based on a particular neighborhood that they had in mind, but you can see here's the city park that is here, and the whole thing is not an edible park. What they've got is corridors in here where there is food trees that they grow, and they can actually sustain those and kind of water them when they need to. And then over here where they've got different, these blocks of tree growth and garden growth, they really have thought through and figured out ways that these could be combined where a group of neighbors are working together to create this kind of a scenario. And they have done that consistently through this plan, and I think that's another one of the reasons why it really does take a change in a community's perception of itself and its neighbors in order to figure out how to actually implement something like this. And here's the aquaculture district. And it's another one of those areas that I think there's a lot here, but I don't really know how to break this down for you in a way that's going to be, that I feel like is accurate for what they were saying. But, you know, you've got pieces here. And I don't know if y'all can see, can you see the words in the back? Okay, good. And then integrating ponds into the neighborhood. And they point out that we don't have ponds here. Ponds are not naturally occurring in our topography, so these would be constructed ponds that people could actually use for wildlife, fish, food fish, different kinds of uses, as well as recreational and watering sources for gardens and that kind of thing. And it's just interesting to me the way that they've designated the tree areas and how much maintaining the tree cover was important to them, because I think it's been demonstrated to people in Arkansas who lived in, like on Markham Street, that you gotta have some tree cover to keep your hillside from sliding away.
Mm-hmm.
He was related. Yeah. And the utilize